geopolitical landscape of Southeast Asia is characterized by a complex interplay of national interests, historical tensions, and the strategic maneuverings of global powers. In this scenario, the South China Sea stands out as a particularly contentious region, with overlapping territorial claims and significant economic and security implications. As regional dynamics evolve, so too do the foreign policies of the countries involved. In this context, the Philippines has seen a marked shift in its approach from the administration of President Rodrigo Duterte to that of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. While Duterte's tenure was noted for its conciliatory stance towards China, Marcos Jr. has adopted a more assertive policy, aligning more closely with the United States and emphasizing the defense of Philippine sovereignty. This shift reflects broader strategic calculations in response to China's growing assertiveness and the need for stronger defense capabilities. The contrast between the two administrations provides a compelling case study in how nations balance between cooperation and confrontation in pursuit of their national interests. As the successor to President Aquino III, President Duterte adopted a markedly more cooperative stance toward China, seeking to avoid conflict over maritime sovereignty. Despite the 2016 Permanent Court of Arbitration, PCA, ruling largely favoring the Philippines, Duterte refrained from pursuing these convictions aggressively. Instead, he implemented pragmatic strategies rooted in realpolitik and rational choice, shifting Philippine foreign policy from confrontation to a more nuanced approach. He preferred bilateral discussions over multilateral forums and supported China's Belt and Road Initiative, aligning with his Back to Domestic Build, Build, and Build campaign, slogan focused on economic development and infrastructure. Duterte's inward-looking strategy relied heavily on Chinese economic incentives to enhance the Philippines' prosperity. This recalibrated foreign policy aimed for mutual benefits. China restrained the Philippines from assertively acting on the PCA ruling, while the Philippines gained economic and political advantages from Chinese infrastructure investments. Duterte's approach strained the long-standing U.S.-Philippines relationship, reflecting his vision for a multipolar world order and a distinct regional identity. This independent foreign policy garnered global attention and criticism, revealing the complex trade-offs and uncertainties involved. Consequently, the Philippines' stance on SCS maritime and territorial claims softened under Duterte's leadership. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has notably shifted Manila closer to the United States, diverging sharply from the path of his predecessor, Rodrigo Duterte. Marcos appears to be the first Southeast Asian leader to decisively choose between the United States and China. Given the Philippines' precarious position in the South China Sea and China's growing regional dominance, Marcos Jr. may have concluded that maintaining a balance is no longer feasible, and that, in the event of conflict, unwavering support from Washington is essential. The rising harassment of Philippine boats and Marines stationed on the disputed Second Thomas Shoal by China has severely infuriated Marcos Jr., with incidents increasing recently. In response to these challenges in the West Philippine Sea, President Marcos Jr. reaffirmed his administration's commitment to maintaining Philippine sovereignty and defending its territory. At the 21st International Institute for Strategic Studies, IUSS Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, he declared, "We will never allow anyone to detach it from the totality of the maritime domain that renders our nation whole."
In this solid footing and through our clear moral ascendancy, we find the strength to do whatever it takes to protect our sovereign home, to the last square inch, to the last square millimeter. The life-giving waters of the West Philippine Sea flow in the blood of every Filipino. We cannot allow anyone to detach it from the totality of the maritime domain that renders our nation whole.
Marcos emphasized that he has vowed to uphold this grave responsibility since his first day in office, stating, "I'm not going to give up. Filipinos are unyielding." He reiterated that the government would make every effort to safeguard the Philippines' territorial integrity in accordance with the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea and the 2016 Arbitral Award. "International law, not our imagination, is the source of the boundaries we draw in our waters," he asserted. Marcos highlighted that the Philippines defines its boundaries based on international law, not baseless claims. He outlined the country's intentions to improve its defense capabilities and strengthen its ties with foreign nations during his keynote speech at the IISS Shangri-La Dialogue. He emphasized that the Philippines would enhance its ability to safeguard its interests in both the global commons and its maritime domain as part of the comprehensive archipelagic defense concept. We will strengthen our ability to safeguard our interest in the global commons and in our own maritime domain as we work to preserve the rule of law in international affairs, Marcos declared. He stressed that diplomacy would continue to be a key component of building the Philippines' defense capabilities. President Marcos also reaffirmed that ASEAN centrality would remain a fundamental component of the country's foreign policy. He noted that the Philippines would strengthen strategic alliances with Australia, Japan, and Vietnam, in addition to its relationship with the United States. The country would also seek closer ties with partners like the Republic of Korea and India. Marcos pointed out that cooperative efforts involving a small number of governments with common interests could build into pillars that support the architecture of regional stability. He mentioned pursuing trilateral cooperation in the Celebes Sea with Indonesia and Malaysia, and expanding collaboration in the exclusive economic zone with Australia, Japan, and the United States. Over the past year, the Philippines' 200-mile exclusive economic zone has been repeatedly targeted by China's Coast Guard and allied fishing vessels, further straining relations between the two countries. Marcos stated that he has been in communication with friends in the international community and has met with his defense and security officers to ensure peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. They have offered to help us with what the Philippines requires to protect and secure our sovereignty, sovereign rights, and jurisdiction, he said. The deterioration of ties with China coincides with Marcos's efforts to strengthen defense ties with the U.S. Beijing is displeased with his expanded U.S. access to military sites in the Philippines and the inclusion of joint exercises involving air and sea patrols over the South China Sea. The U.S.-Philippines Treaty obliges both nations to defend one another in the event of an attack, covering Coast Guard, civilian, and military vessels in the South China Sea. Marcos Jr. emphasized Manila's right to utilize South China Sea energy resources without first engaging China in a statement released on December 1, 2022. He vowed to fight for the rights that belong to his country. Given that the Philippines depend largely on imported fuel, his comments highlighted the urgency of exploring for oil and gas in the strategically significant sea. In the face of a more divided Southeast Asia, Marcos Jr. has resorted to striking a balance between his relations with China and the United States. However, sustaining strategic ambiguity is becoming more and more of a difficult balancing act every day. Beijing is applying more and more pressure. Chinese rocket debris was taken by force from the Philippine Navy in November by the Chinese Coast Guard. In order to restart the nation's slow economic growth, the new president desperately had to acquire investments amidst a severe financial crisis made worse by the pandemic. Beijing might be a trustworthy source, but Chinese investments and the sovereignty risks they pose are touchy political subjects. Protests by the general public against Chinese influence are not unusual in the Philippines, and they may pose a threat to the legitimacy of Marcos Jr.'s administration. Asia's strictest foreign investment regulations, found in the Philippines, limit foreign ownership in numerous areas to 40%. This restriction complicates potential agreements on oil and gas exploration in the South China Sea, even if the Philippines and China were to reach an understanding. Although both nations have shown interest in collaborating with non-governmental organizations for joint exploration, disputed claims have prevented Manila's PXP Energy Corp., which holds exploration permits in the contested Reed Bank, from finalizing a mutually beneficial deal with China's National Offshore Oil Corp. The situation is further complicated by increased U.S. engagement with the Philippines. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. allowed U.S. forces access to 4 additional Philippine military facilities, raising the total to 9. Under the 2014 Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDCA, U.S. troops are permitted to rotate indefinitely for joint training, equipment prepositioning, and infrastructure development, including runways, fuel storage, and military housing. This move aligns with the Biden administration's strategy of strengthening a regional security network to counter China, as well as with Philippines' efforts to enhance its external defense, particularly in the South China Sea. China reacted strongly to this development, particularly since 2 of the new U.S. locations are near Taiwan and southern China. Beijing accused the Philippines of providing staging areas for U.S. military operations, thereby compromising Chinese security. In response, Marcos stated that his administration has no plans to grant the U.S. access to additional military bases. He emphasized that China's aggressive actions in the disputed South China Sea initially prompted the U.S. military presence in several Philippine camps and locations. At a press conference with foreign correspondents in Manila, Marcos clarified, The Philippines has no plans to create any more bases or give access to any more bases. When questioned about whether the presence of U.S. forces had provoked Chinese actions in the South China Sea, Marcos maintained that American troops were there in response to China's actions. He cited incidents where Chinese Coast Guard ships used water cannons and lasers to block Philippine vessels. These are reactions to what has happened in the South China Sea, to the aggressive actions that we have had to deal with, he stated. China, on the other hand, blamed the Philippines for instigating conflicts by intruding into its territorial seas and violating an alleged agreement to remove an old Philippine Navy vessel stationed at the disputed Second Thomas Shoal. Marcos denied knowledge of any such agreement and declared it void if it ever existed. Marcos emphasized that the Philippines must take more concrete actions beyond lodging protests concerning incidents in the South China Sea. He referred to a recent event where the Chinese Coast Guard blocked a routine troop supply run to the Second Thomas Shoal, resulting in a serious injury to a Philippine sailor. While Marcos condemned this as an illegal action, he noted that it did not constitute an armed attack. Despite filing numerous protests, he stressed the need for more substantial measures. The contrast between the South China Sea policies of Duterte and Marcos Jr. signify the evolving nature of the Philippines' approach to maritime sovereignty and international diplomacy. Duterte's strategy prioritized economic gains through cooperation with China, often at the cost of territorial assertiveness and strained traditional alliances. In contrast, Marcos Jr.'s policy shift reflects a robust defense of Philippine sovereignty, reinforced by stronger ties with the United States and other regional allies. This strategic realignment addresses the immediate challenges posed by China's assertiveness, while positioning the Philippines as a proactive player in maintaining regional stability and upholding international law. As the geopolitical landscape continues to shift, the Marcos administration's balanced yet assertive stance may provide a more sustainable and secure path for the Philippines in the contentious waters of the South China Sea.